Welcome to this special Standard Chartered podcast. Today, we're discussing the impact of the COVID-19 crisis so far on trade and trade finance and what this could mean for the future. I'm Helen Sanders, Independent Treasury Specialist, and I'm delighted today to be talking to Michael Brontomitis, Head of Trade for Europe and the Americas, and Jordan Rollin, Head of Structured Solution Development in the Americas. Jordan, perhaps I can ask you first. What changes have you seen over the past 3 months in the digitisation of trade?
Yes, thanks, Helen. As the crisis struck, all trade participants needed to move quickly to an environment in which everyone was working from home. Consequently, digitization of key activities such as digital signatures was an immediate priority. So we saw significant increase in adoption of our digital channels, such as e-advices or straight-to-bank. Vendors of digital trade platform also reported a very large increase in adoption. For example, one digital certificate of origin platform has reported that 60 chambers of commerce globally signed up in only 3 months, equivalent to around 6 years of new adoption under normal conditions.
I mean, Helen, in some countries, governments have led this shift from paper to digital. And we saw this in India, we saw this in Peru and Oman. And for example, in Peru, the government has given companies 180 days, that's 6 months, to move from paper to digital trade processes. So, really impressive, acceleration.
So obviously amazing momentum so far. Do you think that can continue?
Well, once companies have addressed their initial digital needs that sort of Jordan highlighted, the demand for new digitization opportunities under the current crisis has slowed. But however, we do see it very unlikely that this will go backwards and return to the previous manual processes that were there. And so as a result, we are expecting to see a second wave of digital adoption and priority as organizations learn from their experiences during the crisis and plan for a new normal where digital is core to that normal.
So we've already seen a significant trade digitisation over the past 3 months, but what could that mean in the future?
Well, if anything, the crisis has demonstrated that digitization is not a nice to have, but really a must, right? It's shown in a recent poll that the bank has done, where 87% of our clients believe that the pace of digitization in trade and trade finance would accelerate as a result of the crisis. This impacts not only on companies' own digital processes, but also how they engage with their trading partners and stakeholders. One company we spoke recently, for instance, they've been proactively encouraging their partners to connect to a single platform to make connectivity easier. Likewise, another has focused on its internal processes initially, and they are now looking outwards to look, how they and their trade partners can shorten trade and trade finance value chains through technology. However, we are unlikely to see a single comprehensive digital trade and trade finance platform emerging. What we've seen is that 81% of participants in that same poll expected to fulfill their trade and trade finance ambitions through third-party platforms, whether networks or consortia. Consortia that brings together multiple investors are now being commercialized, and it's the right time then to move to that stage. These aim to reinvent the traditional infrastructure and processing of trade finance across an industry-wide platform, as we've seen, for instance, with the Trade Information Network, Contour, or others.
Michael, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, look, I think with all these multiple platforms and some addressing really specific elements of the process, interconnectivity and interoperability will be absolutely critical to avoid digital islands and accommodate the needs of this multiple sort of diverse group of participants in the trade ecosystem.
So staying with you, Michael, what obstacles to trade digitisation would you highlight, and how can those be overcome?
I think I would start with the fact that the economic outlook is really, really uncertain at the moment. And so companies are focusing on controlling their cash flows, their costs, and are being really, really diligent about prioritizing investment. And this applies to both investment on which emerging platforms will provide, which providers will rely on, but also to internal investment. So, even despite that, what we saw in that poll that Jordan was mentioning, which we did amongst a group of clients, 64% of the firms that were surveyed assumed that there would be more investment available for the digitization of paper-based trade processes relative to perhaps some other investments that were there.
Jordan, anything you would add to that?
Yes, thanks. So there's another point, right? At that stage, trade digitization is still sort of patchy with differences between government, trade participants, and so the risk of the digital islands that Michael mentioned before, where you have digitization of certain processes, but with manual elements between them. What we're seeing now is basically the emergence of solutions like Contour, which offers end-to-end electronic letters of credit, and this coming up of that hybrid model as part of the transition to become really fully digital. That would enable digital processes wherever possible, but also would then accommodate paper-based processes where necessary. So crucially, the data flows from end to end so that even if one exchange of the trade process is paper-based, then it benefits the digitization of the entire partners and supply chain.
Well, I think also you can't underestimate the role of governments. In digitization and trade digitization with all these different stakeholders and the complexity of the trade ecosystem just takes time. And governments in particular may take years to achieve this. So consequently, full digitization is sort of unlikely to happen in the short term. But will definitely be a long-term reality. So I co-chair the International Chamber of Commerce Trade Digitization Working Group, and last year we published a roadmap to help governments identify and deliver on key steps that are required in their digitization agenda. And however, digitizing other trade participants needs to be mirrored by governments, such as customs, enabling the electronic bill of lading in law, and so on, which is really, really important. The rules and regulations around digital trade tend to follow rather than drive the market practice. So as a bank, we're collaborating and advocating for standards creation, for their implementation, and one such example is the ITC Digitization and Standards Initiative.
So we've talked about what's happened immediately during the crisis and what the longer term could look like. But looking in the short term, what could the next 90 days or so bring? Jordan, perhaps I can start with you.
Well, for many companies, the priority will be first to keep their company steady through the crisis. But beyond this, we do expect to see a second, more prolonged wave of digitization. So to start with, this is likely to include some quick wins, such as digital supply chain and bill of lading documentation solutions.
And Michael, anything you would add to that?
So we've definitely started to see the nature of client discussions begin to shift. From efficiency and data analytics, and not moving perhaps as agile. We've seen that move to business continuity and resilience, which requires faster action, and this is a trend that we expect to continue. We also are expecting clients and beginning to see some clients embark on longer term thinking. How might their supply chains change? How might they diversify and increase the resilience? And what new business models might they engage in? And how will they achieve this whilst maintaining the consistency and automation of processes and avoiding additional complexity? So lots on the strategic agenda as a result from a digitization standpoint.
Thank you very much, Michael and Jordan, and thank you very much for listening. We hope to welcome you back to another Standard Chartered podcast very soon.